Welcome to Paulogia and another edition of Ham and Egg News, where we react to Ken Ham reacting to things. Although it's been over a year now that we've been noticing a lack of ham with our eggs, and it looks like this is a trend that is going to continue. On November 13, Answers in Genesis announced that the AiG board has unanimously voted to promote Martyn Iles to the position of Executive CEO of Answers in Genesis under Ken Ham. Ken Ham remains founder CEO. Ken has no plans to retire, but will continue in his oversight role of the entire ministry and in his dynamic, impactful speaking and writing ministry. Ken Ham and Martyn Iles will be leading together, slowly transitioning the ministry from being led by the visionary and founder Ken Ham to eventually being led by Martyn Iles, guided by a similar vision to what Ken has had for decades of ministry. Wow. So what do we know about Martyn Iles? First, he's tall.
Well, it's because when I go out and walk around and meet people, everybody says, oh, you're tall. Oh, you're tall. Everywhere I go, it's all I hear when I walk around. So just for those who don't know, I'm tall, all right? So that's what he's getting at.
I look at you and say, oh, Nephilim, oh.
Second, if you swap the first and second letter of his last name, it goes from Iles to Lies. So I'm guessing that's going to be a thing. Third, well, let's stop counting. Let's get a sense from his intro video.
Now, before we get to that announcement, I want to introduce to you Martyn Iles from Australia.
From Australia, yes.
So am I, originally from Australia.
Oh, of course.
You also are an attorney or lawyer.
Lawyer, that's right.
Lawyer.
Australians call it lawyer, so that's what it's called.
And you started a Christian legal firm in Australia?
Yes, correct.
And just real quickly, what sort of topics have you been dealing with as you've been speaking around Australia?
The world is changing so quickly, and there's so many what we would think of as new ideologies out there that are challenging the Christian faith and what people are thinking, the wokeism stuff and postmodernism and critical theories and all that. And even though the world's changing so much, the answers are still in Genesis.
They are. That's a pretty good name, isn't it?
It's a great name. It's worked out perfectly. And you started Answers in Genesis 30 years ago because there were answers there that the world needed to hear. And there's a whole bunch of additional answers that have come out since then. Some we didn't ever know that we needed the answer to, like what is a woman? And my job in Australia has increasingly become, and it's just interesting that this happened, has been increasingly about bringing the answers out of Genesis for this present cultural moment. Answers on the gender issue, the sexuality issue, the life issue, the race issue, which is tearing this country apart, the climate issue and the environment.
So Martyn isn't a scientist or a science educator. He gives public talks on issues like religious freedom, gender identity, legislating morality, and defending Christianity in the public square. His Truth of It podcast covered anti-woke and political topics. The Australian Christian lobby organization that he ran advocated for issues like religious freedom, marriage between a man and a woman, and pro-life causes. Not a word about dinosaurs in the Garden of Eden or a literal worldwide flood. These are not the new CEO's passions or mandates. He won't be debating any scientists. I've been noticing out loud for a long time, and I guess it's now formalized. Answers in Genesis is no longer a young earth creation-centered ministry. It's a Christian national ministry. For the record, Ground News found only one news service picking up on this story. They didn't even cover it on their own Answers News show. I'm not sure if this is intentionally under the radar or if people just don't care. But lest anyone think this is a sign of Answers in Genesis becoming less relevant to the evangelical conversation, let me point you back to the header of Martyn's bio. AiG's casually raising $16 million in a minor end-of-year push this month. This is a $140 million per year business looking to expand its influence in American politics. And hold that thought, we'll get back to that in a minute after these words from today's sponsor. Hey, Answers News Team, what's it like in a world without ground news?
So you can kind of see the
bias.
Little bit of bias,
You can
maybe.
see the secular leftist ideology and the bias there, and it's all the way through.
Yeah, there's no attempt at neutrality, journalistic neutrality or anything.
Not even.
There's really not.
To be fair, Ground News didn't actually get rid of bias, but in the half a year I've been using it regularly, I can now see the bias in my news consumption. We're particularly bad at recognizing our own bias and seeing it is the first step in understanding it, accounting for it, and eliminating it. You can use ground news to follow news on topics of interest. I'm following Christianity and science, for example. Or you can search for a story to see how it's being covered in the media. Like, say, one from our favorite creationist show.
Real-life Jurassic World may exist just on another planet.
You drop it into ground news, and instantly you've got all the articles covering it in one place, a bias distribution, a factuality rating based on data from 3 independent news monitoring organizations, and even the ownership of each source. We're going to be doing this for all our stories today. You can follow along at groundnews.com/Paulogia, and if you subscribe through that link, you'll get their biggest discount of the year. 40% off the Vantage subscription for this month only, which is what I use to do my analysis. And you'll also be supporting the mission of this channel. Link down below. So in case you hadn't heard, one of Answers in Genesis's own is now third in command in the American line of succession. Just behind Biden and Harris is the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. For years, Mike has had his very own bio page as a contributor to Answers in Genesis materials, though they haven't yet updated it to reflect his new gig.
Did you hear about Speaker Mike Johnson and the Dinosaurs on the Ark? Basically, it's written by a guy named Dick Pullman. What fascinates me most about Speaker Mike is his biblical devotion to dinosaurs. It's kind of funny until we examine it closely. The key takeaway is, if you believe in the Bible, as this person says, and much of the secular culture agrees, then you're dangerous.
He basically ties in Mike Johnson and the Ark encounter, so we got brought into this too.
Because he did legal work for the Ark.
He did legal work, yeah. First of all, when he goes into the Ark encounter, he's like, how did Noah fit those weighty dinosaurs on board without breaking the boat? Which, he didn't really look on our website to see if maybe we've thought about that objection before, but you are the content manager for the attraction. So did you think of that as we were building the Ark?
Like last second, it hit me. We better have a sign about that. The huge Titanosaurus and the Tyrannosaurus Rex, you guys hold on to your seats here, were once smaller when they were younger. Okay,
That's
I'm
pretty mind-blowing.
6'9", 230 pounds. I don't fit in a lot of chairs that some people fit into.
It's true.
I used to be smaller.
I wonder if Tim Chafee is shorter than the new CEO. Has the Nephil Tim been unseated?
And everybody's got to put their faith somewhere. Either God's word is your authority about the unseen past, or man's guesses are. You put your faith in one or the other.
Just because I feel like I haven't used it in a while, when you first assume the Bible is true and then attempt to fit the evidence to that conclusion, we call that, or the Bible tells me so.
And then at the end of the article, he ties this all together, where he talks about how, he says, I don't begrudge Bible adherents for believing what they want to believe, although based on the tone of his article, I kind of have a hard time believing that, but okay.
Yeah.
After all, freedom of worship is constitutionally enshrined. What's dangerous, however, is a House Speaker who's tethered to fairy tales.
That is correct, because if Speaker Johnson's critical thinking skills haven't at least brought him to one of the many flavors of Christianity that accepts and embraces science, then it's safe to assume that his epistemology skills are flawed in other areas as well. At very least, if he's willing to reject scientific consensus because he interprets an ancient book in a certain way, then he's definitely going to reject outright scientific input in other important policy areas.
In other words, you Christians, believe what you want, but don't you dare bring it into the workplace. Don't you dare bring it into the public sphere. That's your personal belief that belongs maybe in your church and maybe in your home, but nowhere else.
That's not what the author said. The fairy tales being spoke of are the wooden, literalistic, young earth creation notions of Answers in Genesis, the kind rejected by the majority of educated Christian population. Now, I personally think there's a case to be made to extend questioning the epistemology of anyone concluding that Jesus rose from the dead or a particular God created us, but that's a more nuanced discussion for another day.
The man who wrote this article, he's going to take his worldview, his secular worldview, and he's going to apply it to the way he votes. He's going to apply it to the way that he, if he has anything to do with policy or whatever, he would apply that in his decision making.
Yes, he will.
So he's allowed to do that, but Christians aren't allowed to do that. That's not freedom. That's saying that our worldview trumps yours. You're not allowed to have your worldview.
That's not what the author said. He didn't say you're not allowed. He said it's dangerous. And from your perspective, you openly profess that secular voters are dangerous.
And so truly, the secular ideas are actually, in reality, dangerous. But of course, they're flipping that around.
See? You can say that. And I don't therefore pretend that you said that secular people aren't allowed to have ideas. We just have disagreements.
And then I'd also, honestly, anybody, Dick Pullman or anyone else who's got questions, please come. You can be my personal guest. We would love to have you.
I don't know if Dick will be taking you up on that, but reporter Oliver Wang did. In the most recent issue of The New Yorker, Ken Ham took Oliver on a tour of the Ark to talk about his connection to the new Speaker of the House. The article wraps up, Ham climbed a flight of stairs and shuffled out onto the top of the Ark, off limits to tourists. In 2022, after Ham gave Johnson a private Ark tour, Johnson said that it had almost brought him to tears. Faces of these kids and these families and how it's just kind of opening their minds, he said. It's just really an awesome, awesome thing. Standing atop the Ark like a terrestrial sailor keeping watch, Ham pointed to a new hotel, a symbol, he said, of the economic boon he provides to the state. When we apply for our rebate for the year, they send it straight away, he said, smiling. Money speaks. Wow, that's some movie villain stuff right there.
All right, here we go. Next article, Science paints a new picture of the ancient past when we mixed and mated with other kinds of humans. Which, by the way, if you just read the top of that title and didn't really know the context, that sounds really, really weird.
Let's do a quick ground news check on this one. The story was covered by 59 sources. That's pretty good for recent AiG selections. 61% of the sources are considered center bias. 92% of the sources are high factuality. So it's likely that Ham's crew thinks it's false. Even the Bias Insight tab is reasonable all around. Left sources emphasize the idea that modern humans are not the pinnacle of evolution, challenging the notion of superiority. Center coverage highlights the curiosity and willingness to communicate during interactions with other hominin groups. Right sources emphasize that the study of ancient DNA has revolutionized our understanding of human evolution. So, anyone want to guess what the crew objects to?
But essentially, this is our latest installment of, well, these new finds really change our whole perspective on everything. Evolution is always changing. I had a student of mine that once joked, as I talked about all the changes in evolutionary thinking, they said the only thing that really evolves is evolution itself.
Scientific understanding, including biological evolution, does indeed evolve as new evidence is discovered. This is a strength of the scientific method, not a weakness. It allows us to improve and refine our understanding of the natural world as more data becomes available. Anyone refusing to adapt their ideas with new information is not seeking truth, just affirmation.
The article starts off with, what does it mean to be human? And it says, for a long time, we thought we evolved. We have deep thoughts, complex thoughts, deep emotions. We're the only true humans, modern humans today. And the earlier forms like Neanderthals and those kind of apish-like creatures, well, we're just better versions of them. We're humans and they're not.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm just a caveman. I fell in some ice and later got thawed out by some of your scientists. Your world frightens and confuses me.
And now they say this, but the picture is now changing. And in short, what they're realizing is that Neanderthals, Denisovans, and so forth, these so-called ape men that were really humans, they were really human.
Neanderthals and Denisovans did exhibit complex behaviors, but they were distinct species with unique anatomical and genetic characteristics. While they were similar to modern humans in many ways, characterizing them as fully human, in the sense of being Homo sapiens, is inaccurate in terms of evolutionary biology.
Right? And when you look at the actual fragmentary evidence of the bones, you can tell either it's a human or it's an ape.
This is the great false dichotomy of creationism, unaware or in denial that things exist on spectrums. If you insist on framing all decimals as integers, then 1.3 is fully 1, and 1.8 is fully 2. That's not insight. That's deliberately ignoring significant digits. Creationist logic would deny the existence of purple by insisting that all these colors are either fully red or fully blue. You could do that, but what have you learned?
You see the evolutionary worldview here inching closer to what we'd expect, starting with God's word. Obviously, they're not going to budge on the timeline, but yeah, these are people made in God's image just like we are.
The scientific data does not support the idea that all humans are descended from a single pair in the recent past. Genetic evidence indicates a more complex ancestry involving multiple populations and species within the genus Homo.
Okay. Conference cancels panel on biological sex in human skeletons over transphobia fears, commits a cardinal sin. Okay.
All right, I'm immediately suspicious of this headline, and it's from Fox News, so that doesn't help my confidence. Let's do a quick ground news check before we get too far. To a roar of non-surprise, I see that of the 24 news sources, 84% of those reporting are right-leaning, and only 15% of those covering have high factuality.
So speaking as a scientist, this is just disturbing to me. So this happened for the conference for the American Anthropological Association and the Canadian Anthropology Society. So it was like a joint meeting, and they were going to have a panel discussion on the differences between male and female skeletons.
That's correct. The American Anthropological Association and the Canadian Anthropology Society were going to have a panel discussion on the differences between male and female skeletons. I wonder what happened. Let's go back to ground news and find that lone, single, left-leaning news source. Now, I'm not saying that left bias is correct and right bias is wrong. If this was 85% left, I'd prioritize going and finding out the rest of the story from the single right-leaning source. That's one of the best reasons to subscribe to ground news, to help bust the echo chamber. All echo chambers limit your ability to be informed. Okay, a website called Inside Higher Ed gives us their headline, Let's Talk About Sex, or Let's Platform Transphobia. Association cancels a panel. Well, that's a different story already, isn't it?
Because that's real, and that's observable fact. And that's that's like a real thing. And it's important to know those differences because, like, for example, in forensic science,
it's almost like the organizers agree that this is a real thing in anthropology. The approved panel description read as follows. While it has become increasingly common in anthropology and public life to substitute sex with gender, there are multiple domains of research in which biological sex remains irreplaceably relevant. This article interviewed Agustin Fuentes, a Princeton University anthropologist who defended the cancellation. Fuentes said the panel itself was going to present a boring argument. I work on biological sex. Tons of people work on biological sex.
So we have a forensic scientist that works here, Dr. Jennifer Rivera, and I said to her, we were talking about this, and she said one of the most important things that happens when a forensic scientist goes to where human remains are, number one question they ask, male or female, right? Because that's the number one thing. So it's important to understand how we tell the differences between the skeletons.
And part of understanding how to tell the differences between the skeletons is understanding that it isn't an exact black and white process. The one scientific complaint made about the upcoming panel was labeling the practice sex identification rather than using the field's longtime preferred description, sex estimation. As said in the article, forensic anthropologists use sex estimation because the process is probabilistic rather than clearly determinative, and that it is easily influenced by cognitive bias on the part of the researcher. They would say that a skeleton was probably male or possibly male, but rarely was definitely a male.
Police officers, they need that thing. The judges will need that information. Lawyers need that information. It's an important legal thing. Right. And people are just like trying to be like, oh, it's transphobic to talk about it.
Here's the thing. The American and Canadian Anthropology Associations were willing to host this topic, as evidenced by approving the panel in the first place. What they weren't willing to host were the specific panelists who became attached. I will not be repeating here the specific, public, and proudly held anti-trans statements that came to light made by at least 3 of the 4 panelists. They have repeatedly made it part of their public identity to generally challenge the legitimacy of trans people. And the 4th panelist is best known for allegations of desecration of indigenous remains. None of that is directly relevant to their expertise in sex estimation of skeletons. But it certainly speaks to whether these guests are controversial figures who might reasonably espouse views from the stage causing harm to the LGBTQ members attending the conference, making it a safety issue and lending tacit endorsement. It was these 4 panelists who were canceled, not discussion of anthropological sex estimation.
Speaking about observational science and saying like what bones are like representing male and female, they're saying that talking about this is a cardinal sin against scholarship.
Cardinal sin against scholarship isn't what the organizers said. That's a quote from the disgruntled panelists who were removed, refusing to accept that this was a consequence of their behavior rather than the topic of the panel.
panelists that were scheduled to speak wrote quite an interesting response that said, you guys are being anti-science.
Yeah, and creationists often are accused of being anti-science, right? That we don't believe in the science or whatever. And I'm like, well, first of all, that's just not true.
But it is true.
Like, I just keep saying that there is no crying in science, okay? There's no crying in science, right? It is the way it is. It may be against what you think, you may not like it, but it doesn't matter because it's fact, right? That this is the truth.
This is incredibly ironic, to the point of hilarity, from a spokesperson for an organization whose whole reason for being, or at least used to be, we'll see under Martyn, is to sow distrust of science in general in order to come to massively unsupported conclusions derived from a particularly wooden interpretation of an ancient book.
It's just the problem is how much is this diminishing and holding back science because of these agendas, because of these ideas, and I'm saddened by that as a scientist that that's happening.
Again, the irony. One of the main reasons I want to educate young Earth creationists, as I used to be one, is that huge portions of the North American population, even the Speaker of the House, are holding back science because of young Earth creation agendas. And I'm saddened by that as a human.
They say over the past decade, Johnson has worked and advocated for a religious theme park in Kentucky, one centered around a recreation of the Ark described in the Bible. Sound familiar? You guys all been to the Ark encounter already? The theme park elevates the idea that there was no evolution involved in the emergence of different life forms, including humans. And they say, based on this poll, that nearly 4 in 10 Americans basically comports with that view.
You heard right. The Washington Post reported on a new poll indicating that 40% of Americans think that humans were made by a divine creator and that evolution played no part in that whatsoever.
So I would just say amen to that.
Yeah,
there
but
you go.
only, they also say who will more inclined to be creationists. Those without college degrees.
Check.
And who watch Fox News.
Also check.
Oh, you watch Fox News? You're going to be a creationist.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do.
Yeah, they say if you watch Fox News, if you're a supporter of Donald Trump, you're more likely to be a creationist.
If you've ever cut your grass and found a car, you might be a redneck.
I read that and I was like, is my English working? What Fox News has to do with that?
Correct. It's correlation, not causation. It's a poll. Good polls attempt to correlate opinions with other demographics. No one said that Fox News made you a creationist. The article also had this graph showing that creationism is embraced by twice as many people with no more than a high school degree than those with a master's or other advanced degree. But they all report going to church weekly at relatively equal rates. This counters Ken Ham's notion that belief in evolution is a religious issue. It's not. It's much more an education issue. Okay, let's pick up the pace and hit a few more.
Sadly, we have to go on to this one. Canada will legalize medically assisted dying for eligible people addicted to drugs. So Canada will supposedly they will be legalizing medically assisted dying for people who are addicted to drugs next spring, and the move some drug users and activists are calling eugenics.
Yikes. Okay. Quick ground news check shows just 4 outlets covering the story. So 1 left, 1 center, and 2 right is about as balanced as you can get with those small numbers. All mixed factuality sources, so that's a yellow flag. We'll proceed with caution here. The Ground AI summarizes a proposed bill to exclude mental illness as an eligible condition for MAID was defeated in the House of Commons. This I did not know. Okay, well, this is my home country, and I'm very passionate about rights for medically assisted dying. Add in the complexities of drug addiction policy ramifications, and this is obviously a very nuanced topic that needs a very serious discussion.
I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to one of our resident astronomer Canadian. Resident Canadians. I've been hanging out with Danny Kaufman too much.
Yes, I am a Canadian, so yeah. All right, so this is really sad.
It's okay.
All right, so sad news, sad history. So basically, euthanasia was legalized in Canada.
This is the story with a giggle fit? Get it together, Patricia.
Through the Supreme Court was basically saying there's not going to be a slippery slope because we have safeguards. So they're like, it's only going to be for adults over 18 and only with a grievous, irremediable medical condition. This is terrible. I should not be laughing. I blame Rob.
It's my fault. It's my fault.
And reasonably foreseeable death.
Can you really cut?
Cut indeed. Great job, AiG.
All right, so let's go ahead and, before we run out of time, let's get another one in here. There we go. LA County from the Christian Post. LA County tells social workers there is no right or wrong to ask a child about their sexual orientation here. So, I think this is just more evidence our culture has lost its mind.
According to Ground News, just one source covering this, a right-leaning source, a mixed factuality source. The summary seems to contradict the headline. Apparently, whatever policy they're talking about applies only to children aged 10 and up. So obviously, under the age of 9 would be wrong, according to the policy. Perhaps the quote in the headline refers to some other scenario. That's not important right now, because I'm wanting to look at this panel's lack of self-awareness.
My point that I was talking to them, it's someone that's as young as 10 years old, they don't even know what sexual orientation is, gender identity, unless someone is pressing that information, is teaching them that information.
Someone as young as 10 years old doesn't know about God, doesn't know about sin, doesn't know about judgment and hell and abominations, doesn't know the earth was created in 6 literal days, unless someone is pressing that information, is teaching them that information.
You know, the Answers in Genesis ministry here in northern Kentucky, we're actually moving into a new headquarters building at the end of the year. We have our own Christian school, Answers Academy, and you want to very much get involved in education. And
if not, they don't even know what that is, what that means. But because they have been so pressured by the school, you know, the teachers and all this.
We also have an education arm and producing curricula for homeschool and producing curricula for Christian school.
I mean, look at this. The child has the right to choose. Imagine you're putting a responsibility on a child that is 10 years old to choose what is right, what they want, that's a lot. That's abusive for a child.
It's an extraordinary opportunity with the Ark Encounter, the Creation Museum, the global resources and education stuff that you're doing, and also just a voice to be standing on the authority of God's Word for this present cultural situation that we're in.
We as parents, we try to take all those responsibilities because we know that the kid doesn't have ways to judge things, ways to understand things, they don't have reference to kind of judge and you balance things.
Help to lead that ministry in a way that meets emerging concerns in the new generation and a changing cultural context, but without losing any of the truth that the answers are in Genesis.
I'd also like to point out that they contradicted a lot of these points earlier in the show when the shoe was on the other foot.
Most adolescents reject cornerstone beliefs needed for a biblical worldview, survey finds. This one comes from us, from Christian Post here.
Oh, Christian Post. The exact same news source as the social worker story. Is anyone else covering these things? Let's check Ground News. And nope, same stats. Even so, this is very worth checking here because it demonstrates just the stark level of echo chamber where a show like Answers News lives.
So essentially the summary of the research that they've done is done by the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. Essentially what they did is they examined the so-called 7 cornerstones of a biblical worldview, and they looked at it among adolescents defined as children between the ages of 8 and 12 years old.
So around the same age as the previous story.
And they found that just 3% of respondents embrace all 7 of these cornerstones, and they say about 13% agree with maybe 5 or 6.
So not every kid just accepts what they're being taught?
Yeah, one thing I thought it was interesting here, it says, while a majority of adolescents, 69%,
Very nice.
believe that God exists and is the all-knowing, all-powerful, perfect creator and ruler of the universe.
But I think what we want to do is want to focus on that number 5 there of 25% say that they trust the Bible because it is completely true and personally relevant to your life. Ultimately, that really is the root cause. And Patricia, would you agree with that?
Yeah, because that's what all the other points come down to. If you don't have that biblical worldview, you're not going to get the rest of it.
Exactly. If you don't come in already assuming the Bible is completely true and can't be challenged, then you would never arrive at the same conclusions as Answers in Genesis.
We have to understand that it's abusive.
I definitely understand the abuses of young earth creationism, which is why I'll keep doing what I'm doing.
I think just from listening to you even speak now, I think people will be able to say, wow, he knows what he's talking about.
Aw, thank you, Ken. That means a lot.
You have a lot of videos even on your YouTube channel, and people can go and see those.
I do, and they can. In fact, they can tap on the thumbnail on screen now, and I'll see them over there. Until next time, later.